Thanks for coming and welcome to the Adelaide Microsoft IT Pro Community April 2025 Meetup. I'm Andrew O. Young, a Microsoft Modern Work Specialist at Data, also a Microsoft MVP in Security under Intune. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me via the QR code or the link, but most of the show notes and the recording will be reposted via my blog on M365senpai.com.
I'm Shahan. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in security, specializes in Entra ID, identity access, Intune, and Defender, and everything in between. I'm also an architect in that same space, and from Bastion Technology Services. Yes, so that's my QR code for my blog and all the information, and I'm active in LinkedIn as well.
All right, and just a quick thanks to our sponsors, Microsoft for providing the venue for us to have our events, Systematec IT Consulting for keeping the meetup alive, Dicker when there is swag available, but also for allowing me to be here for this time, and the M365 Senpai for providing refreshments. In case you missed it, and it's been a quarter by now, but we have got a new podcast. So this is Out of Band, a Microsoft security podcast, and this is hosted by myself, lovely Shahan over here, and Anthony Porter from Perth, who's a cybersecurity architect at Canon Business Services. So we are currently at a fortnightly cadence, but we're looking to maybe move it to a monthly. But for more things across Microsoft security stack, Defender, Purview, Entra, and so on, we'll be covering topics around that and inviting some guest speakers from time to time. That's a QR code to our LinkedIn page, but we'll be across most platforms, so Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so on. So last week, week before even, but Shahan and I, we traveled to Washington State in the United States, and we were there for the Microsoft MVP Global Summit. Lots of familiar faces there. It was a great experience. Managed to meet up with some other MVPs and Microsoft staff in person, which is great. Plenty of connections made. We had some serendipitous meetings with other travelers on the same planes, traveling for the event. Finding out that I finally got to meet Mark Cashman in person, which is great. Clippy is alive and well. And we caught the light rail every morning to the summit, so you can see how awake we are in that photo. But also, I've got like this one right here. That's one of two anechoic chambers on the campus. So these rooms are designed to have insane sound baffling. So there is no echo in that room. So you are hearing just the start of sound, but there's no trailing. So it does sound really weird. The other one of these is much more isolated. So it's a room inside a room. So there's absolutely no vibrations from the outside world. So when you stand in there for prolonged periods of time, you start it's a bit creepy. You start hearing your own heartbeat and all that in your ear. But these rooms, they're generally used for testing the sound emissions from electronic devices, so laptops, Xboxes. They'll put it in the middle there. This room's got some styrofoam stuff going on, but the other one we had some funky stuff going on there with all these microphones. And that's the quietest space on the other. Yeah. So the one inside Studio B, where all the Xbox stuff happens, that holds the record. And just wrapping up. But also, I couldn't find yours, but we found our names on the name wall, which is pretty cool. And it's back to reality. So good times. All right, well, we'll jump into the what's new section. We did talk about there being a SharePoint January event that's now on demand. There was also a SharePoint hackathon last month, and it's already completed. The results and the winners were announced, so feel free to check that out. I myself need to actually catch up on that and actually see what happened and what of each of the 5 categories they had. In modern work, if you are on the Insider program for Microsoft 365 and you're running Windows 11, you've now got access to 2 new apps. The first one being People. So this one gives you a handy little app there that you can pin to your taskbar, and it gives you a way to just quickly get to people's profile cards. So instead of say minimizing and changing apps or clicking through menus to find the drop down to find the details, it's all in this little convenient app here. So it's like that really long desired staff directory kind of approach, but it's standalone, sits in a little app, very handy. And from what you can see there, you've got pretty much what you see in the Teams fly out there. But yeah, being able to initiate chats, calls without changing apps and so on. So quickly sending a message in here. And if you don't know, if you are a new starter and you don't know everyone's names, you can just look up like a position or a title or anything to do with that person. And it's got some built-in smarts to actually look them up and provide you the nearest results. And with the Files app, similar thing. It sits in the taskbar, but this is like having access directly to OneDrive without going to OneDrive, but having the intelligence on top of it. So you can, anything that's been collaboratively worked on by a certain person, what type of file it is, it'll give you all those results. So you don't have to go trawling through everything. And the worst part about data really is trying to find it. So having it all in the nice, handy little pop out here. And you can get previews of the files as well and share it directly from that little pop out. So not having to go to SharePoint or right clicking and doing the permissions and all that. So it's all in the one spot. There is a new Viva Engage app for the Microsoft Teams mobile app. It's a bit of a mouthful there. So this is essentially what used to be Yammer, but it is embedded into Teams. And what this updated app is going to do, obviously, you'll get your home and your community feeds, but you'll also have things like the leadership corner where the leaders can connect directly with the employees, share updates, and kind of foster that community and so on. There's also campaigns, and there's also answers. So answers being kind of what used to be the Viva topics, but if someone has posted a question in one of the communities and people respond to it, you can mark that response as a best answer, kind of like on forums. And that will essentially just give you access to all of those top answers for your questions. Start moving slowly into security. It's still kind of under modern work, but Microsoft Entra ID governance, we saw this got a bit of an upgrade when the Entra suite dropped a few months back. And what Microsoft has done has provided us a handy deployment guide to work through the how, what, and achieving kind of their best practices, I suppose. But give that a look if you're interested in the ID governance space. I think we'll do a session on that at some point, because it's actually pretty cool with the whole, like it says here, life cycle management of your users, so new staff coming on board, staff moving around the business, and then staff leaving, and just ensuring that all your user accounts are safe and compliant in what they're being used for. Really, I'll stop talking for a bit.
Yeah. So this is conditional access policy is something new that popped up recently. So that's in the preview at the moment. So usually, like before this feature, you had to open up, we had to stream your login, sign-in information to a log analytics workspace in Azure, and then run your own workbooks to find out this sort of information. But now, the good thing about this is you have a per policy impact, which is in preview. So I've shown the all users MFA, so you can see over there the impact of that policy and the users as well. And if you click on those three dots or the other corner, you can go into the sign-in information for that instance and see what's the browser that's being used, what's the IP address, and more information. So it's all in the new policy impact tab for every conditional access policy. Again, conditional access policy features. So this is, I think this was preview all this time, but now it's on GA. So in the sessions, so you can set up periodic re-authentication if needed for any authentication scenario. But now you have the option for every time as well. So every time you can use it for, so as an example, you can show, you can show there VPN or high risk sort of users, privileged users, for an example. So you can use that every time, regardless where they are coming from, which laptop they're using, to re-authenticate. So there's a new token being issued every time. So that's for extra security. So that's in the GA at the moment. But if you go to the sessions section in the conditional access policies.
All right, and this is a nice bit of news a few weeks back, but the M365 E5 security add-on bundle is now compatible with Microsoft 365 Business Premium. And essentially what this means is all those Plan 2 versions of those security products there can now be bolted onto Business Premium. So Business Premium generally has the Plan 1 of most of those things, with the exclusion of Defender for Business, which is kind of a 1.7 because it does include the EDR component. But this is pretty good news because it means you don't need to upgrade your license to an E3 to then bolt on the add-ons. You can go directly onto Business Premium. So for those organizations under 300 users, this is a pretty good standpoint. And part of that is, well, that's US dollars, but effectively you're paying half of what you should be for all of those things standalone. I'm still a bit iffy because that's about $21 Australian. I'm a bit iffy about that because they didn't offer a step up in pricing, but I guess there is more in there than, let's say, the Entra Suite because you're only really halfway there. But for the sake of security, it's probably worth every bit that's in there. So definitely look into that if you haven't already. At the same time, and just announced overnight, Windows Auto Patch is also coming with Windows M365 Business Premium. So this was previously only in the Windows 10 Enterprise E3 SKU. So graciously, they've now rolled it down into Business Premium, and it's effectively a better kind of, well, it's more of a canned, pre-created, grouped way of doing Windows updates. So if you have been using Intune, you would have seen that there's update rings. You got to go and manually create these rings, assign you groups of devices and so on, and then create the policies per update. With Auto Patch, as soon as you onboard it, it'll just create these accounts, create all the groups for you, and all you have to do is just assign devices to the specific groups, and you've already got these pre-provisioned update rings and policies and so on. So really cool that they're including in Business Premium, making it more valuable or value something. But yes, I do like the idea of more things from the enterprise space moving into small, medium business because they're just as important. It's just that they don't have thousands of users. So nice move in the right direction. All right, if you hadn't heard about these, there are agents for Security Copilot now. And let's see if there's any sound. There's probably no sound.
Security and IT teams are flooded with alerts. Threats have evolved, moving faster than ever. Attackers use AI to strike smarter and relentlessly. Defense must evolve too. Static automation isn't enough anymore. Teams need something smarter. Microsoft Security Copilot is taking generative AI-powered security to the next level. Meet Security Copilot agents. These agents autonomously enhance security and IT operations, while your team stays fully in control. Seamlessly integrated with Microsoft security solutions and many of your existing tools. Agents work in the blink of an eye. Gather context. Investigate with threat intelligence. Sift through endless alerts. Prioritize risk. And recommend actions for remediation. Reducing response from days to minutes. All while working alongside your team to streamline workflows and amplify efficiency. Agents automate time-consuming, high-volume tasks, so your team can focus on the most critical threats. Unlike traditional automation that's static and rigid, agents continuously learn, adapt, and evolve, improving with every interaction. Built on the Security Copilot platform, they're secure, reliable, and easy to deploy for smarter defense, faster response, and better security. Microsoft Security Copilot agents. Built to empower defenders. Built for the future of security.
All right. I'm sorry if the online couldn't So apologies if there was no audio online, but it was loud enough for it to come through the microphones, I think. So agents are everywhere now, so essentially they're just fine-tuned bits of the LLM, but now for security as well. So the Microsoft built ones, they are the ones I sort of briefly showcased in that video just now, but these ones are out the box, ready to go. If you are already using Security Copilot, they will become available for you to add, whereas there are other partners out there who have created their own agents and made them available. So I haven't looked into any billing models, but sometimes they're free. Sometimes you have to separate subscription for those services, but it's all about getting better value out of your security AI. So having the agent do most of that stuff for you as you work along with Security Copilot. I'll stop talking about that because rambling. At the same time, every month we're talking about these, but the Ninja training for all of the different security products from Microsoft, or the Defender for X, and so on. There's also a cloud native app protection policies book if you get bored of doing all the training. But yeah, you get certificates of completion after doing all of them. Bit of an update on Microsoft Learn. We did talk about this last time, but there's a new exam and certification coming for the Purview side of things. They're essentially removing the compliance piece and leaving all the information protection in there. And you can just take these applied skills to show that you know how to do compliance and all that. There's GitHub courses coming on Microsoft Learn. So there were new exams and certifications released a couple of months ago. Those are coming on the 19th of this month. And the above, I believe the learning paths are coming either this month or next month, as the old exam and cert will retire at that point. I have left that in there, but yes, the Copilot Academy in Viva Learning, you can actually customize that and add in your own learning sources, so SharePoint libraries with videos and so on. Microsoft Student Accelerator, ANZ, they have frequent online meetings. I'm still looking to try and get them to come in person to Adelaide. And the partners in the room, the Azure Solutions Partner designation, they've got SMB paths now. So kind of halving the requirements in terms of skilling, new customer adds, and the monthly consumption and so on. They'll do the same for security in the next month or so, maybe. So stay tuned for that.
Hi everyone, Andrew Young here, Microsoft MVP and M365 Senpai. As part of Microsoft's 50th anniversary, they are holding the AI Skills Festival. That's 50 days of AI discovery and learning starting next Monday. And that's not all. Microsoft are looking to set a Guinness World Record as well, for the most users to take an online multi-level artificial intelligence lesson in 24 hours. So from Monday 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time and concluding Tuesday 9 a.m., jump in and start learning. So Microsoft aims to have around 50,000 individuals across tech and business professionals, students, and business leaders take part in this initiative. So what are you waiting for? Register now at aka.ms/AI Skillsfest, and we'll see you there.
I briefly mentioned MSA, but there's MLSA, so the Learn Student Ambassador Program. So they're very close with the MVP program. These are for people in higher education, so TAFE, uni, studying IT at the moment. They join a Discord server, they join this program, and if they do some community activities and so on, they get upgraded to beta and gold, and it's a foot in the door to the MVP program. And they get swag versus what we get. And that MSA. So Michelle Sanford is the lady to speak to. But if anyone's keen on helping out with that, let me know and we'll try and get something this year. And a quick whip around the other user groups in Adelaide. We've actually got Daniel's Copilot user group on Wednesday. But yeah, the rest of them are on a similar cadence of once a month. So we're all on Meetup. We've all got LinkedIn pages as well. Yeah, check us out. And in terms of what's coming, I don't know why I've left that there, but that's already done and dusted. The AI-powered BizCamp or BizApps Bootcamp. There's currently a Fabric community conference on at the moment. I believe that's on demand as well. But there's also a Microsoft Places webinar coming up. So Places was that app where you can kind of assign your hot desks and your meeting rooms and so on to an app, so that you can see the telemetry behind that with all the return to work right now. You can see how much your rooms are being used and control and book straight from that app. There's a global AI community bootcamp, very similar to the global Azure bootcamp that Cheng Yong over there used to help out with. That's just around the world. Places are doing their own kind of activities around Azure AI Foundry, Copilot, and so on. So look around. I think there's nothing in Adelaide, but Sydney, Melbourne, there should be some events on. There's also M365 Con in Vegas, and then Build later in Seattle. And for us, obviously we're doing data security and Copilot today. If all things stay on track, we'll have hybrid identity next month, and then potentially some DevSecOps in June. I'm just trying to remember who put their hand up for that one. But if anyone's keen for speaking or requesting certain topics, please feel free to use the QR code and fill out the form. Otherwise, reach out to us over socials and we'll work something out. We are needing a few more slots to be filled, but yeah. Well, you can probably sit down now.
Yes.
Yeah, well, you can intro me if you want. All right, so slot, and we'll take you through. So data security considerations for M365 Copilot. I've already introduced myself, so I won't talk through these points. I'll let you take a photo. All right. So the first question is why? And I'm going to open up to the room here. Why do you think, or what is important about data security, especially with Copilot? All at once.
The simple thing of people not considering the data that they're giving it to the agent to run with, and not having the relative permissions or being able to do what they want with it. So important to block it because that's bad.
Yeah, and any more specific reasons or use cases? Staring for room engagement.
I guess that's potential oversharing of data that are unknown that get discovered by Copilot in the graph.
So we talked about oversharing, data leakage. Some places are highly regulated, so auditing and audit trails are handy. External threats, because everyone's trying to get your data, and internal threats, because everyone's also trying to get your data from inside. And that could be intentional or accidental, and so on. So how do we try to prevent this from happening? I heard you guys talking about this outside, so there's foundational security, permissions, and so on. There's something new called Copilot Control System. So as soon as you get M365 Copilot, you have access to some governance tools, some telemetry around what you're doing with Copilot. Something else called SharePoint Advanced Management. That's also part of your Copilot license now. So you got some granular controls around the access of SharePoint for Copilot. And Microsoft Purview, so the compliance suite. We'll go into that in a bit more detail. And there's also something new called Data Security Posture Management, or DSPM, for AI. So back to foundational security, there's things in the tenant. So from a tenant level, there's certain settings that you need to put in place, and at the same time permissions. So from an overall SharePoint admin center perspective, everything on default is you can share externally. Anyone can then share from the external link that you provided. It's just open access as soon as someone creates a link, right? So one of the first things you want to do is probably restrict that, at least dropping it down a level so that it's people with existing permissions. So you have to specifically share it to someone first, and they can access it so long as you've done that. Other things as you can go internal only, so never gets shared externally, and that could be a bit, I guess, blocker if you're working collaboratively with people outside the business. But again, you can go from the SharePoint site level and set up the external sharing settings from there. So you can have certain sites that can't share externally, but the rest might be able to. And then there comes the permission. So we're talking owners, members, visitors, so full control, edit, and read, making sure that your users and your staff are in the right groups, be it M365 groups or we don't talk about SharePoint groups, or security groups that you create in M365. So you can actually, through I guess a bit of security trimming, the users have a kind of a guided user experience. So you can have certain sites where everyone can get to the site, but then you can kind of then whittle down where they can get to. So you can have multiple document libraries in a SharePoint site. Half these people can get into all of them. Some maybe, that one over there with all the general public knowledge. So I've had examples where it's like HR or finance, where you've got the secret HR and the secret finance libraries. So only specific people or executives can access those. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here, because this will get amplified in Copilot because it's based on your permission. So if you're part of these secret groups, yes, Copilot can see that content as well. Jump the gun, there's this identity and access management. So this is conditional access, multi-factor authentication, stuff you should already have in place, I'd like to think. Most tenants have security defaults anyway. If you're on business basic, business standard, you can't get away with MFA. Business premium being that hero SKU, you got conditional access, so making sure you're signing in compliantly, securely from the right place on the right device. That's the first step to safeguarding all your data. And then the Defender suite. So there's Defender for Office, so phishing attempts and all that stuff. Defender for Endpoint, ensuring that malware doesn't somehow take control of your Copilot and go to town on your data. There's Defender for Cloud Apps. This one's not commonly talked about. It falls in between security and compliance, and that either license kind of unlocks it. So the free version, or the free included version, is the discovery piece. So you can have this running in the background. It's going to detect what third-party SaaS applications and so on your users are using, and that's about it. It reports and alerts, but doesn't do anything, or there's no acting on it. So when you do get the paid-for version of Defender for Cloud Apps, you can actually have some proper workflows in place. The more commonly used ones are once you detect someone's using Shadow AI, for example, they're using ChatGPT 3 or DeepSeek or whatever it is, you can actually set it up so that it blocks either access to it or prevents you from copy pasting your sensitive information into those third-party cloud services. So highly valuable, that one there. And I'm sure there's other Defender products as well that I'm not thinking of. There's Identity, but that's more of an on-prem or hybrid situation. So kind of the things you should already be doing. If you haven't seen it, there's Secure Score in your tenant. So, whoa, geez, don't use your mouse for a clicker. So Secure Score in your security center, you can go through based on what licensing you have. You'll have specific things that Microsoft recommend you turn on and configure. So conditional access for all your admins, your users, disabling certain features like the external sharing, and making sure that you've got the Defender for Cloud Apps policies, even just discovery in place, so that you've got a kind of a baseline to work with. That's probably the best foundational security approach I'd want you to be on, really. Same time, the foundational productivity side of things, make sure you're using SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, because Copilot works on the cloud, doesn't work on your on-prem, unless you create connectors, but that's a separate conversation. If that stuff has been migrated from a file share, it's in SharePoint, you've got the right permissions and so on, and you're ready for Copilot, kind of. Okay. So it's been harped on since Ignite in November, but Copilot is that UI for AI. So it's the entry point for all your data and all the generated content. So you're the user, you got Copilot, and you can now create agents, add on agents from the store, and build all sorts of crazy things. So they've got something called the Copilot Control System. Those two slides are very similar. That's not a good slide. Something just had a bad time there. Hang on. I think the screen just died on me for a moment. All right. The Copilot Control System, this is all part of that license you get for M365 Copilot. So we talked about there being this thing called restricted SharePoint searching. There's the SharePoint Advanced Management. There are dashboards around how you're using Copilot. Is it meeting your expectations in terms of the KPIs that you set? Is it time saved? Is it processes optimized and so on? So there.
Andrew, sorry, can you reshare the screen in Teams as well? We've just got the video feed at the moment. Thanks.
Okay. It died that badly, did it?
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Okay. Bit of a. All right, we're jumping into the behind the scenes of M365 Copilot. There's some walking. So if you haven't seen this slide before, or this image before even, we are seeing effectively what happens each time you send a prompt or a message to Copilot. So that top left Copilot icon, that's you and your interface. So for example, let's say we're in PowerPoint and I've gone, create me a deck based on this document, etc., etc. That prompt goes to the actual Copilot guy in the middle there. And from here, it does something called grounding. So it's basing what you've asked it. It's going to look up in the Microsoft Graph, because everything that M365 lives on is powered by the graph. It's the brains behind it. It has the connections between your users, your files, your meetings, your emails, etc. So depending on what you've provided in your user prompt to Copilot, it's going to go down to the graph, pick up all the related content to your prompt there, and it will actually find more things, because it builds something called a semantic index. So once you're assigned a license, it builds a separate list alongside the graph. And this is more around the things of, you've created these documents, this person's worked on it, and it's related to this project. So it's got this list, and slowly it's jotting down at a crazy rate, building all these relationships between you and your files. So once it's picked up that content, it goes back to Copilot with this modified prompt. So it's what you had plus some more, and then it goes off to the actual large language model. So this is the GPT-4o or whatever version it may be these days, which lives in a independent Azure instance that's still inside your tenant or your M365 service boundary, as they call it. So nothing in or out unless explicitly allowed. So you can see on the far left there, you've got things like the other agents, you've got Bing for the internet, Power Platform, Dataverse, and so on. Those are the general connectors you'll see out the box usually. There's a bit of playing around to get those connected, but that's not the limit. You can go to on-prem servers, other databases, SAP, or whatever you can think of. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of connectors at the moment. But that's only if you allow them in and out for those connections. So besides that, it's all inside here. All the responsible AI, all the retrieval augmented generation happens inside that large language model. And when it's done doing that, it pumps it back to Copilot. And if it's a good boy, it'll send it back down to the graph and do the compliance checking. So all of the things that we set up in Purview and so on. For example, data labeling. Is there any data loss prevention in place? It's going to check all that first before it then hands it back to the user, so yourself. So if you've created a Word document or a slide deck based on an existing document that has sensitivity label set up, so let's say it's sensitive or highly confidential, you have multiple files, so differing levels of sensitivity, it's always going to honor the highest sensitivity. So it could be the highly confidential versus confidential. It's going to pick highly confidential. So that file you generate will then be tagged as highly confidential, and this kind of closed loop interaction with Copilot is then also audited. Well, is that the right word? It's tracked. It's in the audit log. So your prompt, the response, counts as the interactions with Copilot. So if you do need to go back in time and find out what a certain user has done with Copilot, you've got the evidence sitting in there in the audit log. So you can see, they provided these prompts, or Copilot actually responded to this information. And there's some deeper things around something called prompt injection attack, where you can start a prompt and then halfway through change the instruction. So you can go, ignore what I just said, but give me this instead. That's part of communication compliance, which we may see later on, and that's picking up what's been said and what's in the actual audit trail. So the communication compliance piece will give you alerting, will give extra actions. It's all part of the adaptive protection piece. So we'll jump into that later on, but we're all savvy with what's happening here in each interaction. So the first thing I mentioned before under the control system was restrict SharePoint search. I hate saying this. So RSS. So effectively, you are creating a list, a curated list of up to 100 SharePoint sites that you are allowing Copilot to actually be able to access. So that's the first gate. So yes, I've got 20 sites, for example, but I don't want Copilot to ever see finance and HR or secret research over there. So you can do that, and you just provided access to all of the general sites. This is highly technical, bit deep, but it's just PowerShell to actually enable the RSS feature itself. And if you're a bit of a masochist, you can go through and add those sites one by one using PowerShell. But I'm sure there's a much nicer way to do it. But this is what you can do it with. A URL list and a CSV file is probably the best way. So in Excel, just pop all those site addresses in there, and they're going to be available to Copilot. So if you're not a member of that site, don't have permissions to it, you're not going to have access anyway. But if you did, Copilot has access to it. So you're kind of controlling what access Copilot has. And then comes the user permissioning. So like it says at the top there, your organization's admin has restricted Copilot from accessing certain SharePoint sites. I have stolen some of these from Microsoft directly, but yeah, it's not a Copilot feature. It's outside of Copilot. So technically I suppose it is a SharePoint feature. And you generally wouldn't want to do this unless, because it does break the overall search feature. So it kind of stops those sites from being indexed by the search. So this is, I should have included the other slide. It's a flow chart. It's around, you've done your discussions internally with your stakeholders, your champions, whoever's going to be part of that pilot group testing. And you've gone, cool. We're happy to go ahead with M365 Copilot, but are we ready? Is our data security policies and so on in place? And if no, you haven't done any of the Purview side of things, this could be kind of a fast track of, let's just start playing with Copilot, but we're going to ensure that it only has access to a handful of sites so that it's not risky. So you've got execs, you've got middle managers and the information workers at the front. Everybody has the same experience because it's the same sites that they have access to. And I guess the idea was this is we want to be able to give ourselves time to obviously play with it, pilot it, but also the opportunity to set up those correct security profiles as well. So once you have put in place the Purview and so on, you can come back in here and disable this, and it'll then kick back in. You'll have access to the org-wide search again, and it'll be based on your permissions and your Purview settings. So the SharePoint Advanced Management side of things, we've got manage content sprawl. So we are familiar with content sprawl. You got everyone's got access everywhere. They got edit, they can create. You've got files in places they shouldn't be. So as that kind of just explodes over time, you have documents everywhere, and you're trying to bring it back in. It's kind of the opposite problem to siloing, where stuff stays in separate locations that you don't know about. This is stuff going everywhere that you don't know about. So being able to put a bit of a stop on that and ensure that the files and so on are staying in the right place. That oversharing piece, you're going to see multiple places where you can control it. This is one of them. You can do that in, talked about before, in the tenant or site settings to prevent external sharing. You can use things like data loss prevention to prevent sharing externally via other vectors, so email or downloading to USB drives or whatnot. And yeah, there's even a blueprint that Microsoft provides now, and I can share that later, where they give you the, I guess, best practice on setting up all those policies to ensure that nothing is being overshared from the get-go when you're adopting Copilot. Controlling the Copilot access. So similar to what we did there with the restricted SharePoint searching, SharePoint Advanced Management lets you kind of go a bit deeper. So from the document library or the folder, or even the file level, you can set up restrictions that Copilot can't access from here down. So maybe they can get to the site, but there's certain things in that site that they can't get to. And then managing content lifecycle. So it's kind of, might be a bit of an overlap with the data lifecycle management in Purview, but the idea of this is, a file's created, it's saved somewhere, and depending on what industry you're in, you might be regulated and you need to retain that information for 5 years, 7 years, could be medical, legal, and that's for records, so your records management side of things. But what happens after 5 to 7 years? Are you meant to keep that data? Are you meant to get rid of it? So you can have things like deletion or disposal policies, depending on, once the retention period has expired, do you automatically delete it, or do you have a review cycle? Has someone come in and vet it and approve deletion afterwards? And I guess that's important because Copilot's always going to surface whatever information is available to it. So if you've got old data from 10, 20 years ago just sitting on just a site somewhere in SharePoint, it's going to refer to it. It's going to be likely wrong and inaccurate. So the results that you generate are going to be not as good. And that could, there's ramifications, providing incorrect or wrong information to other parties. So they're providing you the tools, so the timeliness of that, so you don't have to worry about each file individually because the policy just applies across the board. Okay, so I've talked a lot about Purview. You might not know this triangle icon. You might have seen the older one, which is the eye. So it's kind of a bit of a big brother theme going on, I reckon. So this used to be part of, well, there used to be a single security and compliance portal before they split off security and compliance. And then we had the compliance portal, and it was good, but all the menus and solutions were in random spots, and it just felt everything was just thrown in. Whereas now they've got this new Purview portal, and I'll show it in a moment, where all of those solutions are now kind of categorized a bit better. They're in certain headings, so it's a bit easier to figure out where you're going. And at the same time, you've got a little bit of repetition in terms of some of the, the foundations of those compliance pieces. So things like sensitive information types or labels, for example, you can see them across multiple different solutions because they're based on the same technology. And it helps if I can show you, but I'll jump into the portal after this section first. This slide really is just talking about, Microsoft provides you with the tools. You still have to go and configure them, or you and your IT service provider, because everything's off by default usually, or sometimes things that are on by default encourage adoption and sprawl. Things that are off by default, usually security and compliance. So now Microsoft's got their own commitments, so responsible AI, ethical use, and so on. And they also follow the NIST 853. That's almost 1,000 security controls in that framework, and so they take care of that. And you've got your little chunk here, the 20%, 80-20 rule. You've got to make sure that your own data is protected, specifically because you're using AI now. So just a bit of an overview of what comes in Microsoft Purview. The stuff on the right here, not so much. You'll see that as likely a separate license altogether. That is more of a holistic approach. So your data estate is massive. It could be multiple servers, databases, your cloud, your other cloud. You've got a data map that can bring in all that information. So you've got all of your different repositories in the one place. And at the same time, you can classify or use the catalog there to classify that data and kind of start pulling it into Microsoft Purview. Similarly, if you've got on-premise file servers still, you can use the used to be called the Azure Information Protection tool, and it runs a scan across your file server and does a very similar thing in detecting all your sensitive information. So on the left there is all the bits and pieces that we're really concerned about. So information protection, data loss prevention, and insider risk management are probably the three main bits of Purview that we would need in place before we start using M365 Copilot. The other things in that list, really nice to have as well, but we'll come to it in the licensing breakdown on what you do and don't get, or how much you will need to pay to get. And just to kind of make it a bit more, reiterate on the fact of those three I mentioned just before. So we're protecting your data, you're preventing leakage of data, and of course you're managing any risks from inside the business, all those internal accidents maybe. And of course, translates to those three products, so information protection, data loss prevention, and insider risk management. I'm killing you with PowerPoint. We'll switch to the portal soon. So information protection is where we are creating or configuring those sensitive information types. So things such as personally identifiable information, so driver's licenses, credit card numbers, sensitive terms, medical terms, and so on. Microsoft has done a whole lot of work for you creating these. It's using machine learning. So as it runs its scan on your tenant, it looks for your SharePoint everywhere, and any documents that may contain certain phrases and patterns, it's going to detect using those sensitive information types. So you've got those ones. You can create your own document fingerprints as well. So if you've got a form or a contract with a certain format, you can provide that to Purview and say, any document that looks very similar in this formatting, tag it as the same type of document. Say it's a contract or an agreement or some form of sensitive content. At the same time, you can also go down the path of exact data matching or creating your own trainable classifiers as well. And that requires a bit more, playing around with things like regular expressions or regex and so on. But you can be a bit more accurate with that. So if something that isn't included in Microsoft's several hundred info types, you can create your own. So something that is specific to your company, say it's a project or a product name, you can create that information type, and then Purview will start using it as part of its detections. But the sensitivity labeling side of things, you get 5 that are created out of the box, and that's the general, public, confidential, highly confidential, and general, I believe, if I didn't mention that. So these ones are very, very basic. And if you have them turned on, your users can see them and they can start applying them and so on. The idea is you want to sit down beforehand and determine whether those are the right names or if you want to create your own. And you can also create sub-labels. So related content to, say you've got a certain project going on, but you've got other sub-products that are related to that. So you can nest those labels, but you always adjusting the priority. So that different ones will have precedence over another one. So you can only really attach one label per file. So it's going to pick the one that's either the most sensitive or the highest on the priority of list there. And so it's highly tied into the sensitive information types, because once Purview detects a file and it says, oh, this is a medical file, it'll then look at the list of labels you have. And if you got one that's related to medical, for example, it'll assign that label for you if you've got the automatic labeling policy provided to you. And that is usually another level up in terms of licensing. So say you've got business premium, you've got labels available to you, but you have to manually assign them. So once you publish that label, your user will see the label. They may or may not willingly assign the right label. You can have the policy set up to say there must be a label assigned, and that forces them to assign a label before they can execute. So say it's an email, they have to put, it's public or it's private or whatever it may be before they can actually hit send. So a bit annoying, but it is what it is in terms of the manual side of things. So if you were to go get licensing that includes automatic labeling, then it's the next step. Once you've published that label, you just say, based on whatever sensitive information type you have there, assign this label, just do it. And then you got a different approach. So your users can then go, oh, maybe it's not this high of a sensitivity. I want to drop it down to say it's general or something. You got some options around that. You can go allow them to reduce the sensitivity or remove a label, but they need to provide justification maybe. You can also prevent them from doing that at all, or it's probably bad practice to not monitor that altogether. So you have options. At the same time, you've got the ability to do it in kind of a simulation mode. So your first couple of weeks might be, let's see what happens, kind of like an audit mode, and just kind of track what happens in terms of the assignment of labels. Sometimes, if there's no changes to that policy, then you can allow it to then just activate it and go ahead, which good and bad. Generally, if nothing needs changing, that means it's working, right? But I'd still probably vet it before you do let it go automatically turning it on. So just maybe check in, make sure no one's had any issues. I will jump to the right there because it's kind of related. So on the left, that last bit is around encrypting access. So those labels at the same time, you can assign permissions. So the one that Copilot really cares about is the extract permission, which means it's what's giving it access to read content out of the file. So long as extract permission is available based on that label, Copilot will still be able to access it. And the encryption side of things, we can also fully encrypt documents that are being shared externally as well. Then yes, jumping to the data loss prevention side of things, the similar policies. So you're creating a DLP policy based on a label or a sensitive information type. So same detection kind of process, except it happens when you're trying to share data or data is being moved. So it will then apply the label, the sensitivity, or so on. And based on that, if you are in, say, Outlook, if you try to send out an email that contains a sensitive file, multiple things can happen here. So depending on what you do, and I'll show you shortly, you can have it in that same simulation mode where it's silent. The user has no idea that you've got it on, and it may either alert them or an admin of some external sharing. Generally, if you turn on policy tips, you then let the user know, oh, I'm not allowed to share this because it contains 10 instances of credit card numbers, for example. While it's still in simulation mode, it still sends, but it still gives them that policy tip or that warning saying this happened. So that bit of advanced notice to your users will prevent any panic and confusion, because the email has gone out, but they don't know because of the warning, right? And once you have deployed the DLP policy afterwards, it's a bit of a, well, too bad you're not supposed to be sending that out. But you can, similarly with the label justification, there is DLP justification. So yes, I need to send this out because X reason and for Y person and so on. And DLP is not just for Outlook and sharing internally. We've got things like endpoint DLP and so on. So depending on what activities you're doing on your device, could be downloading, could be trying to copy to a USB or upload to a third-party cloud or other online service. Those same signals will get pulled in, and the DLP kicks in and stops you from trying to or accidentally to try to do certain things. In the middle there, insider risk management. So we haven't really talked about that too much. So insider risk, it's generally seen in those bigger corporations where, or sometimes even the smaller ones, where someone could be disgruntled. They might be about to resign or be resigned, and they've gone, no, this data's all mine. Let me download that and run away with it. One of the policies you can put in place is around that piece of people stealing data. So in the actual analytics, you've got an option to set a predate. So you can go, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's up to 30 days prior to the incident or the time that they've resigned, because you can hook it up to an HR system. So it could be an automated process. X person's resigned or they're being resigned. Let's go 30 days in advance. What have they done in that 30 days in the lead up to this incident or whatever the thing is? And sometimes you can find trails of, oh, they started downloading things from here and there, and the volume goes up over time, or it might even be the day prior they've just gone deleted all of their inbox in their Outlook, downloaded all these files, and they've just hit goodbye. And in the follow-up, there's also up to 90 days of post-incident where you can still access and find out what they've done and the kind of the impact from what they've been doing. So the other side of that is preventing that from happening in such things like your communication. So it's not really written there, but communication compliance is just as important because there could be people talking about certain things in the business, so in Teams or Outlook, and it could either be inappropriate language or worse. So it will pick up those things, and across these three things, Copilot will respect whatever policies you put in place. And that last part at the bottom, the adaptive protection. Sorry to kill you with another slide, but they have essentially thrown in a new way to control or protect your information by integrating insider risk management, so varying levels of risk, and then tying it to data loss prevention. So say that person that grabbed all those files and deleted everything in their mailbox, that's probably an elevated risk. So let's kick off a policy like number 1 there, which is blocking access altogether. It could be someone who's just, maybe they're playing with a lot of information that seems sensitive, but maybe they need to do it because of their job role. So DLP policy 2, it's going to be blocked, but you can override it with that justification. Whereas number 3, there's basic ones. You've got one instance of a credit card number or someone's social security number or whatever. Give them a policy tip to let them know that you're sharing something that's potentially PII or sensitive, but it can still go out. And then these can be tied into conditional access policies as well, which is all fun and games. So that block one there, you can then tie it into conditional access and say, maybe this person is doing something risky. Let's force a password reset, force a re-enrollment to MFA or whatever. It's just integrating all of the different controls and services you have. So Entra and Purview working together to ensure that your users aren't doing the wrong thing. The animations, that's not different to what I just said there. So let's pull up. Now bear with me because it's closed my admin portal. Any questions so far? Carl?
It's on the foundational risk, foundational security.
Yeah.
Does Copilot respect groups, like pin-enabled groups? So if I assign that group a resource within SharePoint and it's PIM-enabled, does Copilot respect that kind of access?
The question's around whether a user that gains elevated access through PIM, if Copilot would then be able to access whatever resources in that role. I guess, why would you have data locked behind a PIM role?
The reasoning is dynamic membership for that, because I want to give users dynamic automatically access to that resource in SharePoint, but that group is feminine.
But you only want them to have Copilot
Access to
enhanced access while they've elevated
their permission. For example,
So it's basically not an elevated user, but it's elevated to be a member of the
to a member of that group. Yeah. I think the use case there would be probably, I want them to use Copilot, but I don't want them to access this resource through Copilot. Does that make sense? Or
I think if you add the permission, if you add that PIM group in the permissions in the SharePoint,
Yeah.
then Copilot would honor that permissions.
Yeah.
So if someone becomes a member by elevating the access, so then they can't access anything that's above that permission.
So they have to turn it on before Copilot can access that resource then.
If that's what you're trying to do, if you've locked data in SharePoint behind a PIM role or group,
Yeah.
then Copilot, I suspect, would only have access to that resource when you've got the elevation. But I'm not sure how it would handle it having that duration where it just here's access, takeaway access, here's access, takeaway access. So I'd imagine that it's still got the indexing behind the scenes so that you can just do it and it's the experience isn't bad subsequently. That's it's an interesting use case. I haven't had anyone to say time gated the Copilot access to information.
Basically, what I want is I want users to use Copilot, but I don't want them to use this resource within SharePoint at the specific time, or unless they elevate their.
So when you say specific
Yeah,
time,
not specific time, like just elevate their membership.
The time window comes in the scene when you elevate the access to become a member of it.
So after office hours, I don't want it access anytime. If I'm a member by team, right? After office hours, I don't want them to access.
I think what you're trying to do is the inverse of what the PIM access gives you, because that's you're requesting the access for a period of time versus
Maybe
unless default is no access for whatever, and then yeah,
This kind of like custom scenario.
yeah. Let's chat after because that's an interesting one. Yeah. Meantime, I'm going to distract you with the Purview portal. So here's the newer Purview portal. I don't know why it still pops up for me, but you can see here all the changes they've made. So we'll get started. Talks about your solutions. So all of those solutions we saw before. Just want to get the information protection. Being it's the first time I jump in here, it's going to start provisioning everything. So the first time you go into the Purview portal, it's going to be, let's scan everything in your environment, give you an idea of what it's detected. That's just the overview part. The classifiers, what I was talking about before. So the sensitive information types. So this will give you a rather long list of all the information types that Microsoft have prepared for you. It reckons there's about 327 of them. So some of them are entities or individual type ones. Some of them are bundled. So say all credential types, all medical terms and so on. And as I said before, you can create your own if it comes up. Cool. Now I brought this upon myself because it is a live demo. All right. Now it's gonna. Oh dear, I've done it now. Okay, so give the sensitive information type a name. Just put that in for description. But please be verbose in what you're trying there. And like I mentioned before, it's all about the patterns that it detects. So you can then go through here. And you can set the confidence level. So how likely is it an exact match, or is it a maybe it is a match, but maybe not. But it's all around the primary elements. So I mentioned before, you might need to know regular expressions. You could create a list of words that you can pick out from. You can even use functions and so on. So keyword lists, you create a list exactly in here. It can be case insensitive, case sensitive. And it could be a word match or it could be a string. So a bunch of words all together. And I guess when you are doing that, you can then go down to character proximity. So how close is this sensitive bit of information to another word or another supporting element? So supporting elements are other things you can create as well. So it could be here's name of this thing, here's employee ID. So if the employee ID is within certain words or characters from that term, then red flag happens from there. All right. Well, basically that's the sensitive information type version you can create. If we jump back out, I mentioned fingerprint before, so the document fingerprint. Obviously give it a name, and then the next stage is to provide a document with the formatting. So here, you upload a file, and there's a specifics there, minimum of 4,000 characters. So I don't really know how many words, but so long as it is a document that has all the sample text in place, they don't want template files, so don't bother uploading something with the empty fields. It has to be a legit document. So it is a filled out form or something, for example. Upload that. It's going to only care about the main questions or the consistent text. So anything that's that looks like an answer, it's going to ignore, because that's the dynamic piece that it needs to kind of not look at when it's detecting the fingerprint itself. Yeah. Back down here, trainable classifiers. So we're taking a step further using these guys, and it may take a while to load. And sometimes, depending on the licensing, you may not have access to these. So this is a premium feature if you want to be able to create your own trainable classifiers. So down the line, if you are wanting to use your own kind of content as a specific info type, you set it up in here, but then you do need to create a location in SharePoint for your example files. So all of the positive matches and all of the negative matches that you would want it to test against. So some of the built-in ones that they've got, for example, agreements. Anything that matches that kind of content, it's going to go through and tag it that way. So creating one, like I said before, giving it a name, providing the documents. So when you have a folder in SharePoint with containing, they want a large number, so a few hundred documents that are, this is a actual match, and then the other few hundred is these are similar documents, but they aren't what we're trying to match here. So then you hit create, it goes off and does its own little testing in the background. So this is where that machine learning comes into place. And it'll then come back with you once it's gone through the hundreds of documents it provided, and it's going to say, how'd I go? And then you review that sample set by saying, yes, it's a match, no, it's not a match. And at the end of that, you've trained your classifier. So the fun thing is, if you want to retrain it, you can no longer do it in the new portal. So you need to delete the trainable classifier and recreate it with a different or larger set of sample data. And then it repeats that same process of, is this the right file or not? All right, so labels, once you've got your classifiers in place, I don't know what that is, but similar kind of wizard. You have to give everything a name. In this case, you give the name of the label, but also there's a display name. So I could call it label 1. So the display name is what the user sees. So it could be, go ahead, MITPC. All right, and as I mentioned before, you can kind of adjust the priority afterwards. And then obviously your users want to know what the hell this is, because it'll just suddenly appear in the top there. Hey, this is a label now, and you want to give something brief in here. And then for your admins, the ones who are actually managing all the labels, you can provide different information because they're the ones responsible for making sure the right label is selected or applied. Do that blank for now. Okay, so very large message here. Ignore that for now. So defining the scope of the label, so you can go pretty granular with this, but I think for the most part, if you've got files that Copilot's going to look for, they're probably the places. Files, emails, meetings, and so on. There's a bit more work required for your groups or your M365 groups and SharePoint sites. You do need to run a little bit of PowerShell to enable the sensitivity labels for groups and SharePoint. But once you've done that, that becomes lit up, and you can actually check the box to do that, so that you can apply labels from the site level down. So next. So then each label can have different roles, I guess. So the controlling of the access, the encrypting and all that, that's where you say, does Copilot get extract? Do we want to use content marking? So that's stuff like watermarking across your documents, headers and footers to kind of show that this document is confidential, or if someone takes a photo of it or somehow gets a copy of it, it's it's a bit suspicious. Why do you have this? Because it's got all this watermarking on it. I think we mentioned last month that there is now adaptive watermarking, so it's going to show the current logged in user's username in the watermarking. All right, and obviously there's meetings and chats that we can protect. So when you are going down the access control path, you can assign the permissions now or let the users assign, which sounds like a bad idea. And then from here, it's around content expiry, whether you want content that's labeled to expire or not, or it's always accessible. Whether you want online or offline rather access. And from here, this is where you assign it to certain groups or users in the business. And same time, you've got, we'll go in here. So these groups. So you've pick your user group in here. We'll pick on Adele Vance. And then here you can choose the permission. So by default, you've got editor, which is pretty much most of what you need to do things in SharePoint. And Copilot really only cares about copy and extract and I suppose read if it's in there, but view content rather. So if you exclude any of those 2 or 3 permissions, Copilot won't be able to get into that content. So that's if you want to do it this way in terms of preventing access to stuff. With that, next. And this is the part. So if you have Microsoft 365 E5 or the information protection data governance add-on, that gives you access to the auto labeling side of things. So as soon as you toggle that on, we start talking about the sensitive information types again. So specific, under add condition, so if it contains either a sensitive information type or a trainable classifier, so the ones we saw before. So maybe you've got anything that contains a passport number. We want to apply a label that says passport, something like that. And it'll just run through all your documents and any matches, it'll just automatically apply that label. So that's kind of that first step in Purview, is making sure that the files are detected and are assigned a label, because all the other pieces rely on that label to be assigned in the first place. Get out of this. So when you do finish creating the label, you got to publish the label, and a similar process. You assign it to these people in these locations. So if I hit that now, let's go and publish this one. We could have admin units if we really wanted to. They're very similar to scoping it out, but I'm not going to go into that. All right, so I guess default is all users and groups, but you can then specify who needs to access this label. And so the settings part. So we mentioned before, you can provide justification to remove or lower the classification. And then that second point there was around having your users assign a label, otherwise they can't save or send emails if they haven't done that yet. So the settings around that, we'll just click the boxes. You can set a default label if you want. Otherwise it's none, and then you just let the user decide. But if you've got a baseline, everything is confidential, I guess that's where you do it from here. And so for emails and so on, you can just inherit the label from the document itself, or the attachment rather. Meetings and calendar events. Anyone playing with Fabric or Power BI, you can also assign labeling in here. Purview in Fabric is a whole other beast, so when it's outside of the scope of today. And obviously giving a name for that labeling policy. Okay. We didn't really talk about exact data matching, but it is yet another classifier to use. So you're providing examples of what content it is and what you need it to kind of match with. So this one's a bit more in depth, a lot more steps, and I believe for the most part, using the default sits and maybe using a trainable classifier might be enough just to get you going. If you are heavily regulated, you might need to look down this path, but it's a bit more intense and in depth, so we won't cover that just now. We talked about lifecycle management actually before, so this is the fun around retention and disposal labels and policies impacted by them. So these ones are different labels. So they're labeled as retention labels, so you can drill into this one. All right, same thing, give it a name, descriptions, and so on, and what you want it to do. And it's not going to let me edit that, so let's create a new one. Okay, so you can retain forever or specific time. So like I said before, 5 or 7 years, forever, or custom period. But for most examples I've seen, 7 years probably. And then you pick when to start the retention from. So is it from when the file was created, when it's last modified, which could be indefinite, because if you keep touching the file, it's just going to extend the retention period. Some newer things are around event types. So maybe a certain project has completed and let's kick off the retention period from then, or a certain product lifetime. So that same product from that project, maybe give it a lifetime of 7 years. And then after that, either we dispose of or we archive or whatever we do with the information. We can enforce actions. Or we can just label items. All right, so that's creating a label for retention or disposal. And then there's policies in here. You had the fact that you need to give everything a name, even if you're just showcasing it. All right, so adaptive is the new formatting here, but we'll look at static just so you get an idea. So retention policies around these locations. So some of them may overlap. So you may want to explore this first to see what happens when you turn on certain things. I suspect that some locations are very similar. So Exchange and the group mailboxes or Teams, for example, they share a common location. So sometimes it either overlaps or you just need to do it for one of them, and that's fine. So we just leave it at that. So here's where we could go down the path of, are we retaining or are we deleting, or are we doing both? So at the end of the retention period, do we want to delete it automatically or do nothing? Yeah. So if you have multiple retention policies, it's always going to respect the longest retention period. Then it's going to look at which deletion period. And I guess that's mostly what you'd see in here. So data loss prevention is the other side of using labels. And it hasn't. So you still have access to your classifiers in case you wanted to create and manage them from here, but ooh, that's new. Let's have a look at this one. Obviously gives it a name, set up the locations. So talking about SharePoint and OneDrive here. Okay, so some of the conditions. So if that content is being shared outside of your organization and it includes any of these information types, so the test, the service calc, it's going to then notify users with email and policy tips, restricting access to external users, sending reports and alerts to the admins, and so on. And the policy mode, so this is where you set it to be in simulation mode, being able to show the policy tips, and the part where you turn it on if it's not modified for a certain period of time. Or you can just, gung-ho, turn on straight away and everyone gets all the messages. Yeah, don't do that. The other thing is you can disable the policy. So you don't delete it outright, you can just turn it off from here. In the interest of time, I will jump quickly into IRM. As I mentioned before, communication compliance is related to it. It is under the licensing. So first time you come in here, it's going to ask you to do a whole bunch of things, turn on auditing, turn on analytics, learn about it, and then set up the settings and create the policy. I don't believe I've done anything in here. Ooh. I'm just seeing new things pop out. But yeah, some of these use cases, so is it leakage, is it data theft, is it exfiltration of data or emails, risky AI, which is probably worth looking at this one. So it's nice that they provide you templates, so you just go and create them just without having to mess around too much. Yes.
Is IRM part of Premium?
It's part of E5, M365 E5, but it is a standalone add-on as well. Yeah. Yeah. So triggering an event, the account's been deleted, and other indicators as well. So I will not kick that off because I'm afraid of what it might do. And adaptive protection we talked about before. This is that varying level risk that the policy you create here determines. You do need the extra licensing. Even though this is an E5 license, it is my dev tenant developer program, which may have limited components. All right. Just move along the slide deck while we've got a little bit of time left. So looking into licensing, just because there's a few questions around that. So this is pulled from the M365 Maps website. If you have not seen it before, a lovely guy called Aaron Dinage in Canberra who works for Microsoft has created this website. Loads of infographics. They're all clickable buttons to take you to the Microsoft Learn documentation about those products. So this part here on the far left, the E5 compliance add-on, that's what you can add on to E3, for example. It's all part of E5. So then you break it down. So the second from the left there, you've got those main areas where we've just looked at. And then each one of those has their own kind of inclusion. So the next slide will probably give you a bit more of an idea of what happens. So those are the 3 add-ons you can get individually for Business Premium. You can also bolt these onto E3 if you really wanted to. I guess it's more of a sustained approach to adopting all of this. So you're not buying everything at the start when it takes time to set these things up. So you can start progressively and then just switch to the add-on. But Business Premium, you're stuck with getting these separately. And the first one's probably the most important one because it includes the automatic labeling. Out of all the things on there, that's probably the most important one. And then Insider Risk Management is a nice to have afterwards. The advanced e-discovery and audit, it does give you extra retention periods on your audit logging and provides you some extra workflows with the e-discovery content cases. Yeah, so, and we've showcased this before, but it's a Purview deployment card created by Ray Reyes, who works on Microsoft. And I guess as an overall for AI, you'd probably want to be looking at this. That text color is awful. But the 3 things we talk about are or 4 things rather at the start of this kind of roadmap. Communication compliance is also nice to have. Extra work to do. E-discovery, we have that sort of towards the end because you're really only using that after you've started using AI or other services. So when you're trying to detect any risky usage, pulling the evidence and so on. So DSPM is the bit that we haven't talked about yet. And DSPM for AI, that's also in the portal. I'll bring that up shortly. This effectively gives you a bunch of policies or templates of policies that you can turn on straight away relating to Copilot or AI particularly. So I want to try to be acrobatic there. So if you do access the DSPM for AI site, it will give you a brief list of things to get started with. And then it'll give you the recommendations. So similar to Secure Score, Compliance Score, it gives you, these are what you need, these are the things you need to do. This is how you do it. So then you report back in afterwards and you'll see how, I guess, ready you are in terms of using AI. Again, it reckons I don't have premium licensing, but you can activate the auditing in here as well. The recommendations page, there you are. So some of these might even be related directly to Purview, but there are things that they suggest that you do on top of Purview. Okay. So in terms of learning or learning materials, Microsoft has credentials, so applied skills. These are the free assessments that you can take. You get 2 hours to access a sandbox and follow some instructions, and based on what you do, no, doesn't matter how you do it particularly, but so long as the outcome is correct and they detect it in their system, their scoring system, you'll get the applied skills credential. There's also the exams and certification around this. So SC400 and the SC401 we briefly mentioned earlier. Those are your kind of learning path ways to getting credentials in this space. Any further questions? All right, making good time. There's anything that you want to hear more about in what I kind of briefly or mentioned there? Did I skip anything is the real question. Yeah, pretty sure I covered the 5 things I mentioned earlier, but it's at a peak from outside. I think we need to leave soon. Yeah, so I think we covered most of the things there. So just to recap, make sure your foundational security is in place. Use the tools that you provided through Copilot if you've already gotten Copilot licensing, because I know a lot of places have gone, I don't care, just give me a license. Suddenly you've got execs with Copilot licensing, and you're like, you have access to start setting up those controls and stuff. Check what licensing you have. Does it include Purview? What parts of Purview? And if you got access to the premium features, make sure that you are looking into having them configured. And yeah, there is a DSPM for AI documentation as well. So there's easy deployment guides and so on. Make sure you have a look at them if you are managing tenants and admin centers and so on. Yeah, I'll call it there. I don't think, no, for some reason we deleted the thank you slide. But feel free to leave some feedback, and yeah, well, thank you all for coming in person and online. I can't see you all. If there's any questions online, feel free to come off mute and shout them out. Otherwise, we'll see you next month.